All right. Well, welcome to Roots of Reality Experiences. Today I'm joined by Dave Thomas, who is best known for his acting in the Emmy winning sketch comedy show SCTV, as well as the shows Arrested Development, Grace Under Fire, and the film Rat Race. Additionally, Dave was also a writer and producer for the hit shows Bones and The Blacklist. And in 2020 was appointed to the Order of Canada, Canada's highest civilian award. So, Dave, thanks for coming on today.
Pleasure.
So, when did you first get interested in acting and comedy?
Well, I was interested in comedy when I was a kid. My father was kind of a he was a philosophy professor. He taught philosophy, and he loved comedy. So we at that time it was collecting vinyl, and we had albums for all the British influence because my parents are both British. So it'd be the Goons and Peter Sellers and Spike Milligan, people like that, and then the American influence because my dad was at Duke uh, in the philosophy department, and so the Southern comedians like Andy Griffith and American comedians like Jonathan Winters and Tom Lehrer and Spike Jones and anything that was funny, he collected and played over and over. So it became kind of a badge of honor in our house to be able to do those bits, to be able to repeat them, to be able to recite them, to be able to do the characters complete with the dialects and voices and everything else. And if I could make my dad and his friends laugh, well, that was pretty cool. So that's when I got interested in comedy. I didn't really get interested or think about acting until I was in college with Martin Short and Eugene Levy, and it was a college called McMaster University in Hamilton, and it was a strange experience because they had no drama department, no television, no film. Everything was extracurricular. Ivan Reitman was there making student films with money from the Students' Council and Student Union, and Marty Short and Eugene Levy and I were doing plays for them too. So that was when I started to think, well, wouldn't this be fun as a career? And then I kind of drifted academically into a master's program in English Lit because I didn't know what else to do, and I got a scholarship, and they were paying me to
Yeah.
teach first year tutorials. That sort of thing. Money wags the dog is the tail that wags the dog. So Eugene Levy and Marty Short got cast in Godspell in Toronto, and I started working on a MA in English Lit, and they were obviously having a better time than me. And so while I was working on my master's degree, they had a change in cast in Godspell, and Eugene called me from Toronto, and he said, "You got to get down here and audition because you might get in, and we've told people how funny you are, so come down." So I went down and got in. Then I had the unenviable task of being absent from all my classes because I was rehearsing to be in the cast of Godspell during the day, and then doing the show at night. Sorry, I was doing my master's work at night, and then when the show started at night and I didn't have to rehearse in the day anymore, then I was back in classes and desperately trying to catch up. But I was a complete fraud as a master's student, and I got it. I mean, I it was odd. One of the things I had to do. This is an example of what a fraud I was academically, and how I basically had that. I lucked out. I had a thesis to do. It was a edition of Troilus and Cressida for my Shakespeare class from one of the original quartos or folios. I can't remember which, and that was supposedly my year's work. Well, I was doing God's. I hadn't done anything on that, and then it was due. And so a couple of nights before, about a week before I had to hand it in, I hired a typist using money that I made from being in the stage show on Godspell. And I paid her to type the quarto up. I said, just type half a page and leave the bottom page for notes, because we had to annotate it. We had to annotate the text and explain who Hecuba was, and the classical references and things like that appear in Shakespeare. So I did the whole thing in 2 nights and handed it in. It was just kind of like, okay, I don't ever want to hear about this again. And I got called by the professor, called in to meet him. And he tosses my paper across the desk and he says, "What am I supposed to make of this?" And I said, his name was Dr. Hammond. And I said, well, I really don't know. What do you want to make of it? And he said, well, he said, this is your year's work. I mean, he said, this looks to me that the absolute most you might have spent on this is 2 or 3 weeks. And I said, well, if you want to know the real truth, it was 2 or 3 nights, long nights, but 2 or 3 nights. And he said, you're kidding. And I said, no. And he said, well, it's terrible, but given that you did it in 2 or 3 nights, quite remarkable. He said, so what are you doing? Why? I said, I'm in the cast of Godspell. And I couldn't even come to classes. And, my mother said, don't ever be a quitter. So I didn't quit.
Okay.
So, I'm not a quitter, but I'm a failure. So he laughed and he said, what are you going to do? Are you going to go? I said, I'm going to try this acting thing, see where it goes. He said, you're not going to carry on in your studies in English Lit. And I said, no. He said, if you promise me that you will never try to do a PhD, I'll give you a B on this. And I said, you have my solemn word. I will never, ever. So I got it, but it was a fraud, it was just ridiculous.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
so that was how I sort of hobbled my way into entertainment. And the weird thing was that there was another step to it too, because after Godspell, I couldn't get a job as an actor. It
Oh,
was
okay.
like when the show ended, I went to a few auditions, and there was just nothing that I could do. I got one commercial for Ontario Hydro where I played a guy that pushed a small sailboat into a high-powered electric line and got electrocuted, and that was that was a warning to
Boom. That's
people
right.
about boat safety and electric wires. And but that was the only thing I got. And I didn't want to be a waiter who told everyone that he was an actor. So so I had been editor of the student paper when I was an undergrad. So I went back to my college, and we had the whole offset printing system there. And so I wrote up a bunch of fake ads, got pictures from magazines, reprinted them, made them into ads. I put a portfolio together. I wrote some radio scripts and some TV scripts. And then I just started going to ad agencies, applying in the creative department as a copywriter. And back then you used the yellow pages if you wanted to go through and find, there is no internet.
Yeah.
And so I was going through the yellow pages alphabetically and getting doors slammed in my face like you wouldn't believe. And by the time I got to the M's at McCann Erickson, I got hired. And a guy named Harry Yates, who had worked at Doyle Day and Bernbach in New York, a very famous boutique agency in the 70s that did Volkswagen ads, among others, that were quite popular. He hired me, and he put me on the Coca-Cola account as a junior writer. And within a year, I was the head writer on the Coca-Cola account for Canada.
Wow.
And then I got called down to New York to work with Bill Backer, who was creative director for McCann in New York, and did a couple of Coca-Cola commercials for him and worked for him. And so I was out of entertainment at that point. I was a copywriter.
Yeah.
So I'd gone from being a fraud in the master's program of English lit, majoring in Shakespeare, Chaucer, and Milton, to Godspell, to a failed actor, to a copywriter. And then once again, Eugene Levy called me. He was in the cast of Second City. They had opened this improv company in Toronto. And he said, we're doing a cast change. There's an opening. You got to come. Yeah. I was in New York.
Yeah.
And I said, I'll be there. I
Yeah.
had seen the show and I really wanted to do it. And I knew all the people who were in it too. I knew John Candy and I knew Dan Aykroyd, and they
Wow.
were all friends. And so there was like a little social connection there. And I auditioned for Second City and got in. And then once I got into the stage show, the television show started, and then it was just like a rocket ride. It was just I didn't have time to think, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's so cool to hear stories about people bouncing around in their earlier careers, because I feel like, especially for people, I mean, who become super successful in like the entertainment industry or sports, it's easy for people to assume, who are not involved at all with those industries, to assume like, okay, well, they were just they happened to get into it, but I could never have that opportunity or something like that. But and really, it's just like any other job you're trying to pursue, because you're just kind of bouncing around hoping to get your break, um, and then you finally get it and you just take off. It's so cool. What were your parents thinking through that process? I mean, were they supportive of you trying to pursue an acting
Oh yeah.
career?
Well, my brother, he my younger brother quit school after high school, and he wrote a song called "Painted Ladies" that he recorded for Chess Janis, and it became a hit. And so he was a rock and roller.
Yeah.
He was writing songs, and he had a band and he toured, and so they had already kind of accepted that, okay, this is what our kids are going to do.
Yeah.
My mother's a church organist, and my father's a uh, head of the philosophy department at McMaster at that point. And one of their sons is a rock and roller, and the other son is a improv comedian. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's cool. How much influence on SCTV did like Monty Python or other like sketch comedy shows have?
Oh, tremendous.
Yeah. Can you talk
I
about
mean,
like how you're trying to shape your own show, given the precedent set by like sketch comedy shows before you?
well, we were trying to do something different,
Yeah.
and and in some ways, I think we did. But um, Monty Python was a game changer for anybody who was a real comedy aficionado. Up until that point, sketch comedy had been really kind of one on one. Okay, it's like Wayne and Schuster; these Canadian comedians would do parody of Julius Caesar, or a sketch of his assassination, and it would be, but it's a one-on-one thing. They didn't hop from one thing to another, and they didn't do multi-layered stuff.
Yeah.
And Python started doing that, and they didn't really do that. Well, they did a little bit with the Goons, but it was a radio experience, and that's different, you know.
Sure. Yeah.
The American radio experiences were defined by the stand-up comedians like Bob Hope and Jack Benny, and you know, people like that had a kind of a radio sitcom that began with them doing a monologue of some kind. They would always have a guest star, and there would be a situation, which is what a sitcom is. You know, my mother-in-law is coming, and she hates the furniture that we have in the living room. We got to get it out of there. You know? And so the whole thing is about a situation, you know, and those radio shows became the model for the sitcoms that followed in the 70s. But and comedy, stand-up comedy was going through a transition from the gag-driven stuff of Bob Hope and Jack Benny and the Catskills comedians, you know, like, you know, Fat Jack Leonard and people like that. It was undergoing a change to more conceptual. So you had comedians like Robert Klein and George Carlin and people like that were making connection. They weren't just doing jokes, they were making sort of connections with the audience on lifestyle and society things, you know.
Yeah.
And so we were part of that sort of changing wave, you know, and we didn't want to do a sketch show like Laugh-In, because that was yesterday's news. You know, we wanted to do something more like Monty Python. And at that same time, there was sort of a splinter, like some of the people from Second City went to SNL, and some of the people from Second City went to SCTV. So, but they were both doing similar type of sketches, you know, but also very different, because Saturday Night Live was live, shot in front of an audience. Ours was single camera video, but more like film, and we could do takes, and we would assemble it in editing and things like that. So and ours wasn't topical. Saturday Night Live was very topical, and SCTV wasn't topical because we had to write our shows before we shot. So by the time we shot, it'd be like 3 months later. Anything that was in the news would be out of the news by then. So we deliberately had to write it in a way that was not topical. So, but it was a really interesting time, and a really I thought a big groundbreaking time for comedy, where it really made some, you know, tremendous leaps and bounds, and empowered stand-ups to make connections with audiences in a way that they had never done before. There was a sort of a wall between Rodney Dangerfield and, you know, Bob Hope and Jack Benny. There was a wall between them and their audience, which was the joke. And it was still the joke. And even Bob Hope's monologues, which were more topical, it was still the joke. It was President Eisenhower is doing this, President Kennedy is doing this. And but there was no specific connection with the audience about cultural things that they might have noticed that the audience connected with too, you know. I mean, a classic example of a stand-up thing is like, you ever notice that milk cartons on one side say "do not open this end"? I mean, what would happen if you open the other end? You know what I mean? So they make they make connections and then extrapolate and do exaggerations based on observations, hence the term observational comedy. But it was different. It was things were changing, and it was very exciting to be part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely, a revolutionary period for comedy. And obviously, these shows had so much influence on comedy. Did you ever feel like you were kind of competing against SNL at all because you guys were on at the same time? Or was it just you felt like shows were too different?
We weren't on at the same time.
Well,
Ever.
I mean, the time zone, right? Though you guys had overlapped in terms of like the period of time. Is SNL started like a year before SCTV or something like
That's
that?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And SCTV only started because of SNL. I don't think it would have started without SNL.
Yeah.
But Bernie Solins, who ran Second City, the improv theater company out of Chicago, which had opened a company in Toronto as well, he saw his cast being pirated by Lorne Michaels and put into this show that became a cultural phenomenon, and a
Yeah.
big comedy hit. And Bernie got jealous and pissed off. And he said, "We're gonna do our own show." So, we we had no money and no audience, because it was really hard to sell a show where it's like, we're doing a sketch comedy show. You mean like Saturday Night Live?
Yeah.
Yeah, but there already is a Saturday Night Live. What are you doing?
Right.
So our show didn't find itself for 3 years, and actually 4 years, because it was down for a year. So it was yeah, it was pretty between 76 and 1980. We were sort of constantly the poor cousin of SNL.
Hmm.
And then in 1980, Brandon Tartikoff at NBC put our half-hour show on in 300 owned and operated affiliates of NBC. And suddenly we went from having no audience, like being in 40 markets, something like that,
Yeah.
syndicated. Suddenly we were on networks and network stations, and we were on Friday nights after SNL. So we
Okay.
had SNL as our lead in. So their 90-minute show was the lead in for our half-hour show. But what we didn't know was that Tartikoff was grooming SCTV as a possible replacement for SNL,
Wow.
or as something to put on Friday nights, because NBC was all about branding. They like to have, the Tonight Show with
Yeah.
Johnny. So it's like, what are you doing tonight? Well, I'm watching the Tonight Show. What about tomorrow morning? Well, I'm going to watch the Today Show.
Yeah.
What about Saturday? Well, we're going to be watching Saturday Night Live. So he
Yeah.
wanted to put us on Fridays. That was his plan. He put SCTV on Fridays after Carson, and and that was where we really got our big audience. And our Emmy nominations and Emmy wins and things like it all came out of that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, you worked with, so many interesting comedians. How much of the process for you were you like trying to like share ideas? I mean, how influenced were you by other comedians that you worked with? You mentioned you knew John Candy. And I guess you had at some point in your career you knew Bob Hope, as I understand.
Oh yeah.
How do you like perfect your craft over time as a comedian based on these connections?
Well, I think you I think you got the cart before the horse there. I think you perfect your craft. You work on your craft and you make the connections because of that.
Okay.
I knew John Candy because I worked with him on stage. So we were peers,
Yep.
we were in the same show.
Yep.
And Dan Aykroyd and I had been in the stage show together. And then we were on competitive shows. He was on SNL and I was on SCTV. But Danny and I were still working on scripts. We had a movie that we were writing when he was on SNL Nights on SCTV about UFOs that almost got made. Phil Alden Robinson was slated to direct it, and then they found out Spielberg was doing Close Encounters, so our movie went away pretty quickly. But you know, I remember I wrote a piece for SCTV that Bernie Solms thought was too disturbing for our show, and it was a sketch, a commercial parody for a device called the Pocket Pal, which predicted mid-air collisions sometimes as much as 15 seconds in advance.
Okay.
Now, one of the things we always used to joke about is the sort of useless products that were out there. And since I had a background in advertising, you know, I was very aware when I would see a commercial for a product that had zero consumer benefits. There were no product benefits for that. So the only benefit of a device like that is that you get to start screaming before everybody else.
Yeah.
When you're in an airplane and you know you're going to have a midair collision.
Right.
And they had euphemistic terms for midair collisions that the airline industry developed. They would call it a conflict. You know what I mean? It's like, no. When two planes carrying 200 people each collide and erupt into a fireball of kerosene fuel and vaporize everybody on both planes, that's not a conflict. That's a fucking disaster.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but it was an understatement that the airline industry deliberately created to minimize it. Like when Rick Moranis and I did the McKenzie Brothers, one of the bits was that we put a mouse in a bottle so we could take it to the brewery and get free beer, because that's a big, that I knew this from when I was a copywriter for Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
That was a big bugaboo for the beverage industry. They called them passengers. There wasn't like, oh God, there's a rat in my Coke. Nobody would say that.
Yeah.
They would say there's vermin in the Coke. They called it a passenger. We have a product here. We have a bottle with a passenger. You know, so those kind of terms were the sort of well, anyway, my point of that Pocket Pal sketch was that I wrote it and Bernie didn't want to put it on SCTV. And I told Danny about it. Danny thought, oh, that's a great, I love that, David. I'll do it on SNL. You'll be the first non-staff writer to ever get a piece on SNL. So I gave it to Dan and Dan put it on SNL.
Wow.
And then Bernie saw it on SNL and came to me and he said, I saw one of our pieces on SNL. How did that happen? I got really mad at him when I said that wasn't your piece at all. It was my piece. I wrote it. I gave it to Dan. I didn't get paid for writing it. I didn't break the terms of my contract. You decided you didn't like it, and so the hipper cooler show put it on.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
So, anyway,
yeah, that's interesting. So I mean, I guess when you're creating a sketch comedy show and you're coming up with material, it's just a lot of people getting together and just throwing out ideas. Then, or
oh yeah, and it gets to a point where the show takes all of your ideas and then still wants more.
Yeah.
There was a sketch. There was an episode of Star Trek called The Doomsday Machine. And it was this sort of cornucopia that moved through space, eating planets wherever it went. And it was this insatiable machine that could never be satisfied. I used to liken our show to the Doomsday Machine because you would come up with every idea that you had and you would feed it into the show. And then next week you had to do it again. And it was like, oh my God, I can't do it. I can't come up with anything else. So it was exhausting. And ultimately, a lot of us had burnout. We just would get to a point where we had nothing. We had no ideas.
Yeah. Do you think that was like one of the advantages SNL had then, was that it was so based on the news that was happening of that week that it was easier to come up with new material?
Uh, yes, that was definitely something that was different. But they also had time off. They never did the show every week.
Yeah.
So they would do 3 weeks on, 1 week off, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, things like that, you know. So and then by the time you do the yeah, there's no getting around it. It still burned people out. Both shows burned boom.
Yeah.
You know, I remember talking to Danny and he was just like, oh, I got nothing. You know,
Yeah.
I don't have another
Yeah.
idea left. I can't give this show anymore. And so, you know, then you go on, then you get an offer to do a movie, and next thing you know, you're doing a movie, you know.
Yeah.
And I had actually had a start in the movie business as a writer um before I did my first movie that spun out of SCTV, Strange Brew with Rick Moranis. Um, I started writing movies on my we'd have 3 months off or something like that a year, and then sometimes if there was a if there was a down year where we couldn't convince somebody to be a deficit financer for SCTV, and that happened twice, then there'd be 6 months or 8 months or almost a year off in between the
Okay.
shooting of the episodes. So I went to Los Angeles and I started out uh, writing a adaptation of a Calvin Trillin book called Runestruck for Columbia Pictures
Okay.
for a producer named Alan Greisman, who was dating Sally Field. And you know, once you write one, unless it's garbage, then you get asked to write another, you know. And then they had back then they after Animal House, comedy was like the soup du jour. It was like what, you know what I mean? If you were a comedy writer and you could point to having worked with Harold Ramis or any of the people that were in the cast of Animal House, you could get a job writing a script for a movie studio.
Yeah.
And sometimes it would be an original script, and you know, sometimes it would be a rewrite of some other script. Rewrite this and make it funny. Take this drama and turn it into an Animal House. You know, it's really funny the way executives thought of comedy as spice, as seasoning. They
Right.
didn't.
Right.
They didn't think that you need comic structure to hold this together. It's just like, no, you add the jokes. You just add the jokes to anything. Here you go, do it. You know.
My gosh.
But it paid, and it was good. It was good money and it was good work. And I got a lot of connections in Los Angeles before I got down there, you know.
Yeah.
I, I was writing for Joel Silver before he became a big mogul movie producer. And I wrote Spies Like Us with Dan Aykroyd for Universal on another one of those hiatuses of Second City in 1980. And so yeah, so when the opportunity to do a movie that spun out of a sketch from SCTV presented itself for Rick Moranis and I was ready to jump anyway because I'd already been writing movies, and
Yeah.
I was burned out from the
Yeah.
sketch. I had no more sketch ideas left.
A logical transition then, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, it was.
So, how'd you get involved with the film Rat Race?
Well, the guy who hired me to write Spies Like Us was a producer on Rat Race.
Okay.
Plus, I knew half the cast,
Yeah.
and I knew Jerry Zucker, the director. So they just offered me the part in that, and I took it. I didn't think it was a great part when I got it, but I thought, well, maybe I can make something out of it. But
Yeah.
I did it because I was John Cleese's lawyer, and I loved him, and I
Yeah.
never met him. So
Okay.
this is a chance to work with one of my idols from Monty Python,
Sure. Yeah.
and he was absolutely hilarious. He's completely insane. He's like, he's a very, he's a very. Here's a story that is an example of John's um, nuttiness. Um,
Okay.
we we shot in Calgary, we shot in a place called Ely, Nevada, and we shot in LA. But when we were in Calgary, when we were flying back to LA, they put John and I in the same car to go to the airport, and then we were on the same flight. And I'd been working with him, so I knew him.
Right.
And when we got to the airport, they had one of these concierge people meet us, greet us, and then
Okay.
these are people that help incompetent actors find their airplanes.
Okay.
And she was very sweet, but she made the mistake of saying to John, "Can I get you anything?" And John looks at her and he says, and he's very tall, imposing, and
Yeah.
very intimidating. He says, "Yes, I'd like to have a proper English breakfast before I fly." And the woman looks at him really puzzled. "Excuse me?" He said, "A proper English breakfast: bacon, eggs, toast, tea, marmalade. You do know what a proper English breakfast is." She says, "Well, I it's 7:30 in the morning. I don't know if there's anything except Jack in the Box open that." He said, "You mean to tell me in a city, Calgary, Alberta, Canada, 860,000 people, that I can't get a proper English breakfast before I fly? That's just not acceptable." So she runs off, just terrified, to try and find John a proper English breakfast. And I turned to him and I said, "What the hell did you do that for?" I said, "That is just so mean." He said, "I don't know. She looked like she wanted to have something to do." So that's John. John played with people, and it was pretty harmless, but it was funny, and I found him a delight to work with.
Yeah. I
So,
mean, yeah, it kind of sounds like he is a little bit like some of the characters he portrays in these comedy
oh yeah,
sketches. Or yeah, pretty funny. And
absolutely.
you also, I mean, there's so many, really famous actors in that film. I know Rowan Atkinson was in there. I mean, it's just, what was it like working with all these interesting people and personalities? I'm sure.
Well, Rowan is a very quiet, understated guy,
Okay.
but I ended up having. We went to this place called Ely, Nevada, which is in the northeast corner of Nevada. There's no airport there. It's inaccessible by anything except roads, and they weren't going to drive the cast of the movie there. Amy Smart and John Cleese and Rowan Atkinson and all those people. So they flew us in a private jet, and then we stayed at like a Best Western motel, and there was really nowhere to eat. The food was just horrible, and we shot so much there that we all had a lot of time on our hands. So I had lunch with Rowan, I don't know, maybe 15 times or something like that over the course of that. And I knew Lovitz from Saturday Night Live, and John and I were friends, and he was pretty crazy and funny. Um, and I became friends with Kathy Najimy. And one night they had in this Best Western. Everything in Vegas, or everything in Nevada is gambling, even if you're not in Las Vegas. So they had a row of, like, a square of slot machines on the top floor of the hotel around a hot tub. So there's just a bunch of slot machines around the hot tub. So we came home. We came back to the hotel after shooting for the day, and I was with Kathy Najimy, who played John Lovitz's wife, and we were just playing the slots because we couldn't get any food. There was nothing to do, and I put money in this Wheel of Fortune slot, and I got the top prize, but it was really hard to read the machine to figure out how much money that was. And it, when you win in a slot, all the bells and whistles go off.
Right.
And this woman comes out who worked at the hotels. God damn it, what's all the racket? I got to turn this goddamn thing off. And so she unplugs the machine. And Kathy Najimy is saying, wait, you can't unplug that. He won. You got it. And she goes, well, I don't even know how much you won. I got to wake up the assistant manager now to find out how much you won. So she wakes up the assistant manager, and he comes down and he looks at it and he goes, yeah, I think you won $15,000. I was like, holy shit, that's not
Wow.
bad. Instead of having a bad meal at this motel, I got $15,000. So he gave me $15,000. He goes away and gets 15,000, comes and gives
Oh
it
my
to me.
gosh.
And then he called me in the morning, the same guy. And he said, Mr. Thomas, yeah. He said, I gave you too much. I should have only given you 7,500. He said, would you please give me the 7,500 back? Or the boss said, they're going to fire me. And I just said, yeah, okay, sure. So I met him. And Kathy was mad. She's, no, you don't give him money back. You want that money,
Oh
they
my
paid
gosh.
you. It's a done deal, So it was like, there were stupid lifestyle things like that happening while we were making the movie, that made it entertaining for us and
Yeah,
fun.
sure. Well, I mean, yeah, the film, I remember when I first saw the film, I think I remember my brother just found it by accident on like HBO or something. It was
Mhm.
just on, and he watched it, and it just became a huge hit in my family. He watched it and he showed me the film, and we just all thought it was absolutely hilarious. And it got to the point where then my dad watched it and then my grandfather watched it, and it was just several generations all just loved the film and thought it was hilarious. I remember your character, I thought was really funny, and interacting with the scene with like the hooker scene and like talking about like, oh, making bets on stuff. And
My favorite in it was John Lovitz in Hitler's car.
yes,
That
yes,
was that was
yes.
that was my absolute favorite in that whole.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean that's right, the Nazi Barbie museum, and just these insane things that I just couldn't believe that you guys came up with this stuff. Just one really funny scene after another. I mean, it for me and my family, it really is like the funniest movie we've ever seen because it's just nonstop. Just hits when it comes to comedic relief. Yeah, it's just constantly making us laugh, and I don't think I've ever had a movie like that. So
Well, when I went to I wanted to make Cleese laugh, and the first day I met him, I went into the makeup trailer, and I introduced myself, and oh yes, SCTV, I've heard of that. I've never seen it, but I heard of it. And he told me later he had seen it. He was just playing with me. But but I said to him, John, I had this idea for my character. I want to know what you think. Um, I love that he's intimidated by you, but maybe it's to the point where he's sweating profusely. And I said, so I thought it might be fun if, and I've got this figured out, and I actually talked to the prop guy, and they could build it, where they ran a little hose up the back of my shirt into the back of my hair,
oh
and
my
just
god,
had a constant stream of water shooting off my brow.
that's
And
hilarious.
Cleese went nuts. He has this wheeze laugh, and I was so happy. And then John says, "Well, I'll come with you, and we'll both pitch it to Mr. Zucker and see what he says." So we pitched it to him, and he was no, absolutely not, no. we're not doing that. It's too broad, too big. We're not going to do it. So we didn't do it. But John loved it, and that was all I cared about.
I mean, when you guys, put the film together, did you, have any expectations? What were your expectations for the film? I mean, did you think it was going to be a big comedic hit, or because you had so many big
No,
name people in it? But
I don't know. I mean, the model that Jerry Zucker was working on was It's a Mad, Mad World,
yeah,
which had also been a big comedy with a bunch of comedians that came out 20 years earlier.
yeah,
And so I think that was his plan, was to make it like that. And I don't know how it did, be honest with you,
hmm,
when it came out, because opening weekend is all about what else is on.
yeah,
What else is opening this weekend, and you once you get killed on that opening weekend, you don't get to come back. So
yeah,
I don't remember how it did, but you don't think about that when you're doing it. I mean, I don't anyway. You just think about trying to make yourself and other people laugh
yeah,
and be as funny as possible.
yeah.
And
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it worked. So, uh, it's still, yeah, it's definitely the funniest movie I've ever seen. So, and I did see it actually pop up on Netflix just the other day, actually. So, it has I guess withstood the test of time. I suppose it continues to show up on places. So,
oh yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, if it still makes you laugh, then it's still funny. That's good. That's a good sign too.
oh yeah. I mean, well, I mean, it's just again for me, it's just there's just so many really funny scenes that you would never think about, and they're all thrown together in this movie where it actually makes sense, and it's just just constantly funny. um and I do feel like with comedy films, it's really hard to get it where a lot of people can enjoy it. I think that there's so many comedy films that will come out, especially today, where it's just like completely hit or miss, and like you see the ratings on like IMDb or something like that. There's so many comedy films that get like under 5, um, and they have lots of big name people in it, but it just doesn't work. So I feel like it's tough. It's tough to make a really good comedy film that lasts.
Plus, comedy has become comedy's changed. Um, sort of the political correctness made comedy should be, if it's working properly, it should be pushing boundaries.
Yeah,
And when it doesn't push boundaries, when it's politically correct and woke,
yeah,
I don't know how funny you can be. When
yeah, yeah,
I watched Ricky Gervais, he's got a stand up that's all about political correctness and woke stuff, and he has always done that.
hmm,
He's always pushed those boundaries, and he's hilarious. He's cheeky. That's the
yeah.
British word. The British would call him cheeky. He's a cheeky little fella. That Ricky Gervais, quite cheeky he is. So, but he's funny too. Jeez.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's what I was actually curious to ask about that next, though, in terms of how comedy's changed. Do you recognize the comedy scene today from the scene that you came about in, or how like it's just completely different world today?
No, I was talking to somebody about this. I watched SNL last week because Steve Martin and Martin Short were on it,
Yeah,
and they're friends of mine. And I noticed that the cast now, you know, first of all, people don't deliver their lines with any nuance and subtlety anymore. Comedy is played at full volume, so people are shouting their lines.
okay,
Now there is an element to the fact that SNL is a live show, and it's sort of there's a staginess to it where okay, people could talk loud, I suppose, and that there could be a reason for that based on the room that they're recording the show in. But but now they don't even look at each other anymore. When I was guest star and guest host on SNL, you know, it's a live show and there's the bleachers for the audience are kind of vertical. So the players are playing to the audience, so they're always kind of looking up. But we used to, back in the early days of SNL, and there was at least, we played lip service to looking at the cue cards and looking at the actors, and the people holding the cue cards would be holding them over the actor's shoulders, so at least your eye direction was in. They don't do that now. They're playing out presentationally, and they're talking to somebody who's beside them, and they're going, "That's right, Jim." And another thing I noticed, and it's like, what the hell? Why aren't they looking at each other? How am I supposed to connect with this? A similar thing has happened to music on shows like The Voice and America's Got Talent. The type of music that's winning on those shows is not subtle, nuanced ballads like, Sinatra or even Elvis Presley would sing. They're all belting the songs out at full volume.
Okay.
The stuff that makes the people up in the nosebleeds of The Voice in America's Got Talent cheer and applaud wildly, as if somebody can really scream a song at full volume and hold a note longer than anyone else. So that's a style of singing that has emerged. So I think television and comedy and music are both changing because of that.
Okay.
The way, and it's really the way reality programming, I think, has influenced television. Now, the streamers like Netflix, and so you got shows on there that are cinematic. So that does have nuance and subtlety. But I'm just talking about the network stuff that's on NBC, CBS, and ABC and Fox. That's the stuff that's lost its nuance and subtlety, and now it's all presentational and screaming and top volume. So I think that's a sad thing, because it's not, I don't like it personally. I don't relate to it.
Right.
So that's something that I think is different about comedy these days. And it's funny because there's always a side of it where you go, well, am I just getting old? Is this that I'm not relating to comedy the way it is anymore because I'm an old fellow? Well, I suppose there's an element of that too, but I do think that I do think it is different, and and I'm not coming to it just like Clint Eastwood in Gran Torino sitting on my porch yelling at kids to get off my lawn. I'm not a cranky old man watching comedy. I was watching them to see my friends Martin Short and Steve Martin do whatever Marty makes me laugh harder than anyone today. He's without doubt the best guest of all the talk shows, and he can flatten anybody with a line, and he's so fast.
That's cool.
We did a special. It hasn't aired yet for Netflix. It was a SCTV reunion show.
Oh wow!
Directed by Martin Scorsese, and Marty was in the cast, and Rick, in the sort of group stuff, Rick Moranis turned to me and he said, Marty's still got his fastball. And we were all faster when we were younger.
Sure.
Than we are now, because we're clocking 70 now, you're just not as fast as you were when you're young. But Marty seems to be faster than he was back then. So that's a strange thing. And one of the things that I think makes him exceptional.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting, and that's awesome that you guys are gonna have a reunion show on Netflix. I mean, that's really cool. But yeah, I mean, I mean, and I'm obviously, generations below you, I guess. Um, but I mean, I've noticed that I feel like comedy's different. I don't think I've been able to relate to many comedies that have come out within the last few years, which is sad because I think, especially, you know, 10 years ago, like comedies were the films I was always looking forward to. And now it's more like, okay, well, maybe if there's a drama that comes out or something, that's something I'm
Yeah,
more likely to watch. And in terms of network television, I mean, I think talking to like people around my age, most people don't watch network television anymore. It's all streaming. So it's interesting to see this transition and how it's going to play out.
it is. It really is. It's a big, big change. And I my generation overlapped the older generation. Like, I did an impersonation of Bob Hope on
Yeah.
SCTV, and then I got to meet him, and then got invited to be on a couple of his specials, and um, then I got invited to his house and became friendly with him. So I got to know the guy, and he came from a completely different world,
Yeah. Yeah.
comedy, than I did, and I I thought that was I asked him about, when most people really understand comedy, know that Bob Hope was funny at one point,
Yeah.
and it was probably more like the 1940s and 1950s,
Yeah.
when he was on top of his game, still his fastball, and he had a fastball. He was very quick with
Yeah.
ad libs,
Yeah.
and you can still see some of those things on YouTube.
Yeah, I've seen
But
some of his few films. Yeah, that's pretty funny.
yeah, so and Woody Allen stole his comedy coward character, unabashedly, from Bob Hope.
Yeah.
And I remember, but then Bob Hope got very political towards the end of his career, and started playing golf with ex-presidents and generals and things like that,
Mm.
and he lost touch with his audience, I think. And and I remember sitting on between sketches on the sets of one of his shows with him, talking to him about that. And I asked him about that. I said, you took a tremendous amount of heat during the Vietnam War for your sort of pro-war position,
Mm.
when the younger generation were really against the war.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, yeah, he said, when I was young, he said, there was a war, and then there was a bad guy. There was Hitler. And nobody argued about that. Nobody argued about whether we're doing the right thing or not. It's just, can we do it and win, or can we do it and not get killed? And then he said, things became kind of cluttered and messy, and the bad guys were no longer as clearly defined as they were during the World War II. And he said, so rather than get into the debate of who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, he said, I just figured my country, right or wrong, I'll do whatever my country is doing. I'll get out there and entertain the troops, and I'll be there for. So there's a line in a movie by called 3 Days of the Condor, with Robert Redford, and I think it's Robert Morley or Robert Morse or somebody. It's one of the old actors, and he's being asked by Cliff Robertson, who's modern CIA, do you miss the old days, meaning the OSS? And this guy says, no, no, I don't miss those days. What I miss is the clarity.
Mm.
And it was 3 Days of the Condor is about, the CIA being involved in a oil scam that is not in the public's interest at all, and the CIA not doing what its definition
Hmm.
of what it was supposed to do when it was created. But they're still fighting, and but what they don't have is the clarity that they
Yeah,
had at an earlier time. It's got very, very complicated out there, and in the era of Trump, it's even more complicated. It's
for
just like
sure.
what in
Yeah,
the hell is going on? So forget comedy. I mean, the fact that I don't know what's going on in comedy, I don't know what's going on in the news, and
yeah, it's a different world. Yeah,
it really is. You've got, these moguls, these multimillionaires like Elon Musk and Richard Branson, who are like, you know, they're the pioneers of space now. They're taking over where NASA used to be. But he's a very complicated guy,
yeah,
Elon Musk,
yeah,
as we see with his recent
yeah,
behavior on Twitter.
yeah.
And I mean, I don't know where to go. I I have friends who are left wing and I have friends who are right wing.
Hmm.
And the one thing that in their most sanguine moments they all agree is that it's never been this polarized.
Yeah, yeah.
Now that's as a historian you'll probably argue that and go that's actually not true.
Well,
In
depends on how
in
far you go back, I guess.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah, in
yeah,
1860 it was pretty
yeah. That's right.
polarized.
The Civil War is a little bit more polarized, I would say. Yeah,
Yeah, but it is pretty polarized.
for sure.
And
Yeah,
you see that the Congress has done this big job on Trump and bring him to accountability, but they're going to lose their majority at the end of the year, and it's all going to go away. It's really so bizarre. And I'm a Canadian, so coming from Canada to this, Marty Short's dad used to call the United States the excited states. And the premise was that we were sitting in bleachers on the 49th parallel watching America from the conservative, relatively quiet and calm country called Canada with all its craziness and its insanity during, the the Vietnam War, the race riots, the just all the way through to the modern era and what's going on today. And it's crazier than it ever was. And
yeah,
I don't know, you know, I
yeah.
have friends who will say, I'm not going to say, did you hear about this? Because I'm sure you did. And it's just like so unbelievable. I don't even know what to say.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, the U.S. is a unique place. It's never boring to think about American politics.
No. And that was part of what attracted me and why I came here when I was a kid, when I was a young man, because it wasn't boring. I mean, in, if you want to be playing the game at a global level, the place to come was here. This is where everything was being played at a global level,
Yeah,
and entertainment was just another one of those things, you know.
yeah. I mean, I guess you just kind of have to, yeah, deal with both parts of it. I mean, yeah, the U.S. can be incredibly eccentric, and then also do some things that are like pretty incredible, and so you just kind of ride the waves, and kind of see what happens.
What kind of historian are you? Are you like a medieval historian, Renaissance,
No, no.
modern history?
So I'm kind of a mixed bag, I would say. So like my bachelor's degree was just in general history. So I covered all sorts of different topics. And then for my master's, I studied ancient history as well as a relatively new field called big history, which is basically like history from the formation of the universe to the present. Yeah, looking at the different eras of history and kind of how one thing led to another. So like universe forms, life forms, civilization forms, the Industrial Revolution, and just looking at those big picture phases and kind of seeing how it all connects. And today I'm doing a lot of like political history research. So
What, with respect to the politics of today, you mean?
yeah, so I'm in charge of an oral history project for the Indiana state government, and I interview former politicians about their experiences serving in the Indiana government. And so I learn a lot about how politics has changed and why people think it's changed from those who had served in the past.
And they all think it has changed, clearly.
The overwhelming majority, yes, feels like things have drastically changed. They don't recognize anymore. It doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat, and they just feel like this isn't the legislature I knew, not on just the federal level, but also the state government level. And that I don't think I would ever want to serve in politics today. And so it really is fascinating because you're like, it's it's like seeing. I kind of compare it to someone coming back to visit their hometown, and like all the buildings are abandoned and kind of crumbling. That's kind of how former legislators view politics today in the US. So
Well, and there is a bit of that in the Rust Belt,
yeah.
which you would see in Indiana, I think. And
Yeah.
and it's a very interesting thing. You've got Trump saying, I'm going to keep the coal industry going. And to me, I'm thinking, coal, that's a Charles Dickens fuel. That, what the hell are we even talking about coal for in the year 2000? That makes no sense at all, And it's like, I had a joke that he's king now, but when he was a prince, that Prince Charles
Yeah.
would be at some future point boarding the space shuttle and saying, "Do you have preferred seating for royalty?" And the gate clerk laughing at him, going, "Monarchy, a medieval idea, a feudal idea. You want preferred seating to go on an interplanetary trip? Fuck off." You know what I mean? It just, people hang on to these old values
Yeah.
and old systems. And I understand. My grandfather and my great grandfather were both coal miners in Wales, and so I understand coal mining firsthand from a family point of view. But they were exploited, and they knew they were being exploited, and they hated the people
Yeah.
that owned the coal mines. And the idea that those kind of people have to be retrained in order to be able to find a place in the workforce when the coal mines close, and there are other industries, and there are things that have just gone away in my lifetime, like the slide rule and things like that. So there's a company that made slide rules, and then the calculator comes and then bye, you're done, shut your doors, we're not making any
Yeah.
more of these.
Society
And
changes.
yeah, so I guess that's the big movements in big history at play. My minor was medieval history,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
you can't study medieval history without studying the Catholic Church, because
Sure.
they basically ran things in the Middle Ages in
Yep.
Europe.
That's pretty much.
And you start to look at the sort of arguments of the philosophers like Boethius on consolation of philosophy and St. Augustine, people like that. The great scam of the Catholic Church emerges, which is to convince the people that this life, the life that they're leading right now, doesn't count. It's not the life. The next life is
Yep.
going to be, and in fact, the more miserable and terrible this life is, the better your life will be in the next life. So the church would say, so if you have any loose change or spare chickens that you could kick our way. We're going to put in a good word for you so that you will earn a place in that. It's basically asking people to just ignore the one thing that they have, which is life,
Yeah.
and and, and put it on the side so that other people can get rich and powerful.
Yep.
It's
It's
so
completely
terrible.
insane. Yeah.
It's completely insane.
Yeah. I mean,
And
it's, yeah. Unfortunately, that's just also kind of how most of human history has been. It's just exploiting other people and taking advantage of them and, for your own benefit, and still happens, of course, around the world today. So,
sure. Yeah. And yeah, I don't I'm fascinated by all of that. I'm fascinated by the iconography of the Middle Ages and how it sort of like continued and uh, into the modern era, and even after losing its meaning. And I'm fascinated with the stuff in my lifetime that's become extinct,
mhm.
and and soon I will be extinct too. It's just it's just the way it goes, you know.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah. I
don't know.
mean, yeah, yeah, life kind of moves by pretty fast, and we're all just kind of, future artifacts of time, I guess. So,
Yeah. And then does your history take into, account things like the sort of um, digital reality theories that, you know, we're all code?
yeah, actually, yes. Yeah, so big history, yeah, will also encompass things like, modern futuristic technology. Because one of the aspects is to try to understand, how we got to the present, so we can understand perhaps what, where the future is going to lead. Um, and so, yeah, we do study a lot. I studied a lot of my master's, trying to understand, sort of the rise of the internet, and futuristic technologies, and what's happening in the universe. What is the universe? How does the universe end? And of course, all of it's very theoretical, so we don't really have really a great idea of what's happening, or why we exist, for example. And in the big picture, when you take a step back and you look at, okay, where the universe come from, we don't really know. We know the starting point, but beyond that, it's just, anyone's guess. How does it end? There's many different possibilities of how the universe ends. Of course, that's way beyond our lifetime. um,
Oh yeah.
so it's just kind of an interesting thing, because we do all these things. You're in comedy, you know and everyone's got their lives, but you take a step back from all this, and we're all on the same level of just, we're kind of here, but we don't really know what's going on. And so we just kind of create these realities around ourselves to try to get through it. So,
I became fascinated with, and I wrote a book with another writer in 2020 called "The Many Lives of Jimmy Layton."
okay.
Available on Amazon if any of your subscribers are interested.
Buy it now.
Shockingly low price of $8.99 for paperback.
It's a
But
steal.
anyway, it's a many worlds. It's a quantum mystery,
Okay.
and I got interested in mystery writing when I worked on Bones and the Blacklist,
Yeah.
and I got introduced in a very unlikely way to Max Allan Collins, who wrote Road to Perdition, among other things. He wrote about over 100 novels, mostly mystery novels. Mickey Spillane's, he picked up the Mickey Spillane unfinished works because he knew Mickey and continued writing those. And anyway, I had a chance encounter with him through SpongeBob. Um, Tom Kenny is a friend of mine and was also a friend of Max Allan Collins. And he said, "Hey, Max is a fan of yours and would really love to talk to you. Why don't I give you his number and you guys could talk, and then I put you two together." So anyway, he did. And when I was talking to Max, he said, "So what are you working on now?" And I said, "Well, it's weird that I should be talking to you at this point because I'm working on something that I haven't worked on before." I got 3 chapters of a book under my belt. And he said, really, what is it? I said, well, it's sort of based on the work of Hugh Everett III, who was a theoretical physicist. Well, actually, he was a mathematician and physicist. And he had this theory that called the many worlds interpretation, where, in those sort of binary choices in life where you can go left or right, that the road taken, it becomes our reality, and the road not taken, according to Hugh Everett III, spins off into another reality, and all of the choices that you make or would have made subsequent to that first choice of going right instead of left or left instead of right spin out in that world. So my story is about a guy who manages to access different versions of his life
Okay.
and starts living them, but he's bouncing around from one to another through a series of events that's tied to a mystery that's the core of the novel. So anyway, that's something that I became very interested in. I became interested in the physics of it, and then a friend. I get a call from a guy. I was into old cars, and I had 57 and 58 Cadillacs, and a guy who's a astronomer bought a couple of parts for me for a Cadillac,
Hmm.
and then he said, "I read your book," and um, he said, I want to talk to you about it, So I ended up talking to somebody a who understood the physics and the math of
Right.
what I was doing in that book, and I researched it. I mean, I didn't just like make it all up. It Many worlds is like it's a sci-fi. So science fiction is funny because even though there are it departs from reality in the fiction part of sci-fi, the fi part. Um, there's rules. There have to be rules that the writer adheres to. In time travel, there's paradoxes. There's those
Hmm.
kind of rules, unless you're doing a different type of time travel. But you know, um, you can't come back and kill your grandfather because then you would cease to exist. Those sort of rules, and so you have to be observant of those rules when you cross the line into science fiction. I knew that, so I knew I had to do my research, and he was very excuse me complimentary and kind to me. There were things I got wrong too, and he was very happy to point those out.
Naturally, that's right.
But that was a fun experience, for me, writing a book with a mystery writer that was essentially a quantum mystery. So
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, it just shows how many things you've been involved with and done. There's kind of keep just checking off boxes of just cool experiences, it sounds like.
yeah, well, you got one life.
Yep. Why not? Yeah.
You might as well give it a shot, right? I mean, I that's why I was fascinated when I looked at your the people that you've talked to on your show. I thought, God, this guy's a historian and he's talking to people about really big issues. What the hell does he want to talk to me for?
Well, hey, you're given a different aspect of the world. I mean, yeah, it's cool because you know the the more people that you meet with different experiences and different backgrounds, the more you kind of think about life in different ways. You learn about the world, and I mean, as you said, we're living one life, so why not embrace all that and the complexity and the different things that people are doing? Because we only benefit from those experiences, and so I try to get a variety of people on because I just feel like it's such a cool thing. I mean, I joke with people, all the time that know me and know the show. I just talk about like how it's basically like getting a free education because I just meet all these interesting people who have these really fascinating backgrounds, and
Yeah.
it's just so much fun. So
Yeah, well, I love that too, and that's why I did it. I wanted to meet you and find out why you wanted to talk to me, and then maybe segue into some of the things that you're interested in.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I appreciate it. It's definitely been a lot of fun. So and I mean, you know, especially cool to talk to people that their work, like your work in Rat Race, has had a big impact on my life. I've made people watch that movie so many times throughout my life. Anyone I meet, it's like, you got to see this movie, funniest movie I've ever seen. It'll change your life. And yeah, it's just these cool things. So it's great to be able to connect and to have you on and share all this knowledge about the history of comedy, and how it impacts people's lives. So
I, I look back on it, and I think it's pretty amazing. When I was a kid, I used to watch Bob Hope's specials
yep.
on TV, and I used to audio tape them. There was no videotape then, and I used to tape his monologues because I was fascinated with the monologue and how it worked, and the structure of the jokes and things like that. And um, but I was in a little town outside of Hamilton called Dundas when we had just come back from North Carolina. And Dundas was as far away from Hollywood as, I mean, I never told anyone what I really wanted to do because they would have laughed at me. They would have said, "Oh, you want to go to Hollywood? Oh, you want to be on the Bob Hope show? Oh, you want to work with Bob Hope? Very funny, Dave."
Yeah.
So, and then that happened. So it's it's really funny how you can get, you know, your dreams can be fulfilled if you're persistent enough and lucky enough to get
Yeah.
in the right direction of. And I got to work with John Cleese from Rat Race, and I did a special with Jonathan Winters, and I drove across Texas with Dan Aykroyd, writing a movie about UFOs,
Yeah.
and interviewing people who had seen UFOs, and it was been pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Um, when I look back on it, uh, all the
Well, I mean,
sort of. Go
yeah.
ahead.
No, I mean, that's why it's so cool to talk with you, and to hear you reflecting on your life. I mean, this is also a big part of oral history, is to see people go back through their life and talk about it. And I mean, they're talking about history. These are 200 years from now, when people think about the history of comedy, they're going to look at the stuff that you did, and the other comedians that you're peers with. um and so much, like every time I talk to someone and interview someone on this podcast, in many ways, there's a same underlying theme with each person I'm talking to, because it's the same story of a human being taking their life and just making something of it, and doing all these cool things and gathering these experiences, because it's the same human type of experience that every single person wants. They have dreams, they're trying to achieve them, and we don't know what we're going to do with our lives when we're young, and we just kind of figure out as we go. It's the human story of just kind of adapting to the world we live in and making the most of it. And that's why it's so cool to keep replaying this with different people coming on the podcast, being able to share their stories with listeners, because the stories are different, but the main idea behind them is all the same. Just kind of living life and making the most of it.
Yeah. Well, if you, this ties into your big picture history, but that the sort of landmark pieces of literature, like the Odyssey and the Iliad, things like
Yeah.
that, they were songs.
Yep.
They were actually sung around campfires and transferred from one to another, and that's kind of like improvising, because when you tell a story, and you repeat it, the chaff falls off, and just the essential kernel of what you want to say is what seems to connect with the audience, and that
Yeah.
becomes the story, and that becomes the song that gets transferred from one generation to another that ends up becoming documented. And
Yeah.
I found that really fascinating because, you know, I come from British background. My mother's Scottish and father's Welsh, but they're both Gaelic,
Mm.
and it manifests itself in a lot of ways. I'll tell you, the song aspect of the language manifests itself. There is a dialect coach named Robert Easton who worked with people like Charlton Heston, trying to teach them how to do a Scottish accent, and he would just roll your R, roll R's, you know, things like that. What he didn't understand was that it's a song. It's not a, you don't jackhammer little techniques of saying a word. You got to understand the song. And in Scottish, it's like, you don't say, "Are you going to come out and play? Are you not going to come out and play today?" There's a wee song there that goes up and down like that. That's the way the Scots talk, you know. And that resonated with me when I was a kid, and we traveled around, and you know, and the Welsh and the sort of dour. So then, boyo, I want to see you absolutely make something of your life. And it was, they take words and stretch them out like taffy, but it's also a song. And I thought, well, that's the key to language. It has its roots in music, you know.
Yeah.
Well, at least some of it does. I don't know if that's true.
Oh, I mean, it's yeah, definitely a big part of human culture and communicating um, these types of expressions that people have when they're performing. And of course, the history of comedy, is very old. Um, and people have been doing it since the ancient times in the Greco-Roman world and other places. And um, I think that's a cool thing that people don't think about is just, how all these things that we're doing the same things that people were doing thousands of years ago. It's just, we're in a different time and perhaps have some different technology around us to sort of shape it in a different way. But, a human being, a few thousand years ago, the same, this is just a person at a different time. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, they had was it Mount Vesuvius when it erupted and sort of froze everybody in
like,
stone.
yeah, in Pompeii and
They found that there were fast food places in Pompeii on street corners, and that that makes me laugh. That even back then, you know, you didn't just eat around a campfire at home, but you could go out into the city square and go to a
yeah,
fast food, get some fish
that's right.
done just
Those
the way you like it. Things like that.
cities were happening places, people
Yeah.
were having fun and yeah. Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, the world changes, but in many ways it's the same, I suppose. So,
Yeah, there are similar things, that's for sure.
but
Well, we run out of steam here.
well, it's up to you. I mean, you have, anything else you want to share about your career, your experiences, or
No, I probably share too much as it is right now.
all right,
You
fair
know,
enough. Well,
yeah.
thank you so much for coming on. I mean, this was so much fun and super cool to be able to talk to you. So,
Is this going to play later on Apple? Is that the way
yeah,
that works?
it'll be on all podcast platforms, and you can find it anywhere, and also post it on YouTube, and so wherever people want to listen to it or watch it, they can. So,
Great.
yeah.
Okay.
And
Well,
what's a
thanks
good
for
way?
having me on.
Yeah,
What?
I appreciate it. And what's a good way for people to keep in touch of your work? I know you have a website. Are you on social media as well?
I have davethomas.com is my website. I do have a Twitter account, but I'm not really active, and I do not have Instagram or anything like that.
Okay.
Um, uh, but yeah, that's probably best is just, you know, check out my website. Take a look at my book if you got time and you want to read a good
Yeah.
quantum mystery that has a kind of a sense of humor.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
yeah, and then my stuff is all over YouTube,
Yeah.
like all the SCTV stuff and stuff from the show that I did for CBS, the Dave Thomas show, and even my strange little time travel epic, the Credible Time Travels of Henry Osgood. That's on YouTube.
Yeah.
Everything's on YouTube.
Yeah. Tons of
Amazing.
stuff to check out then. So
Yeah.
cool.